Testing. Moved everything over. I think it'll. And where will you be? Yeah. Yeah. And there's a clock here too, but
How's that? Oh, that's better. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I know there's a lot of anticipation for this. I hear from different folks. My name's Steve Bardsley. My wife, Lynn, will be giving the presentation today, and I'm just here to introduce her, give a short introduction. Lynn has been researching this shroud in one way or another for about 25 years. It's not a continuous, but she's had an attraction to it and an interest in it for that long. So over that period, she's researched a lot of things, picked up a lot of things, just like you do when you're interested in something. You'll read, So over that period of time, she's done that. And at a certain point, she was inspired to put something together that she could share her knowledge with others. And this is the result of that. And it's an evolving, it's a continually being created and updated. And she's given it several places and had very good response. She does a beautiful job. Of course, I'm biased, but but I think it's really wonderful. And I'm sure that there's something for everyone in here today. And you're here because our Lord has brought you here to see this, right? So I'm sure you're going to find something interesting to take away from you and to contemplate. It's an amazing thing, and she'll get into a lot of the details, but just the fact that the shroud still exists is a miracle in itself. It's a piece of flax that should have disintegrated, 1,800 years ago, but is still with us, and it's still revealing its secrets. So I hope you get some good information out of it. Lynn, by way of some background introduction, she's an engineer for 40 plus years, and she comes at this from kind of that perspective. It's not so much scientific as it is just trying to gain understanding, but she takes a scientific approach, and I think you'll see a lot of that in here, the way she presents it. So sit back, relax, and Lynn will take you through the whole story. So welcome.
Thanks, Steve. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm here to present to you the Shroud of Turin and to demonstrate how science can help to advance our faith by helping to discover the truth. The Shroud of Turin is known by many to be the linen cloth that wrapped Jesus' body when he was taken down from the cross. And it's called the Shroud of Turin because it's located in Turin, Italy, in a church there. Now, throughout my talk, I'll be referencing the image on the shroud as Jesus Christ's body. However, you all have free will, so you're free to be skeptical. You see on the top left a famous painting when Jesus was taken down from the cross, and he would have had a face cloth put on over his head when he died, which we still do today. We cover the dead. And then he was taken down, and a linen cloth wrapped his body, as you can see in the painting, continuous piece. Then his body was taken into the tomb and laid on a rock slab. And what they did was they took his head face wrapping, and they folded it up and put it under his head as a pillow. And he was wrapped in the linen cloth and laid. And 3 days later, we know that his 2 disciples, Peter and John, came in and didn't find his body. What they did see was the face cloth that had been his pillow laying neatly folded on the slab, and on the floor was the linen cloth, and there was no Jesus there. So for the past 2,000 years, since the shroud was first discovered, this image of the shroud on the bottom is all people saw. You can see on the right is the front of the body, on the left is the back of the body, and it would have been more pronounced back 2,000 years ago, but it has faded considerably. And tens of thousands of Christians have venerated this religious relic, and through their faith, they believed it to be Jesus' true burial cloth. However, with more recent research on the shroud, we're learning so much more about this piece of cloth and about what happened to Jesus. The cloth itself that Jesus left is a document that tells the whole story. And I'd like to show you through the advancement of science and technology how we can be certain it's Jesus' burial cloth. Like I said, this is all we saw for 2,000 years. until in 1898, an Italian photographer took a picture of the shroud, and we took the film back to his darkroom to develop, and as it developed, he started to see the face of Jesus in the developing pan, and he was truly amazed. And this discovery started the world talking. So what he actually saw with the full development, on the left, you can see what you see with your eyes of the shroud, and on the right, and this actually is the photo negative. It's a negative of the actual image. On the right, he took the negative of the film, and you actually see a positive image of a man. So the negative image is actually a positive image, and in this image we can see so much. So what we see is, on the left, you can see his face very clearly. You see the two creases above and below his face are actually from folding the shroud so many times and put in a frame so that people can see his face over the centuries. The shiny spot on the top of his head, note that, because we'll talk about it later. And you see the blood dripping from the crown of thorns on his head. The white things that you see mostly are blood. In the middle image, you see the front of his body, and what you see there is scorch marks going from the top to the bottom on two sides of his body, and that was from a fire that occurred in the 16th century. And luckily, it only hides his shoulders and upper arms, and it didn't destroy the entire shroud. You can also see some triangular patches that were put over the burn marks, the scorch marks, to help hold it together. The white that you see on his body are scourging or whip marks, the blood from that. And also you can see on his hand the nail mark, and on his foot another nail mark. Also notice on his forearms there's different, if you can, there's different patterns of blood flow coming down from his elbows to his wrists. We'll talk about that later. And also you can see the big spear wound on his right side. So looking at your picture, it's on his left, but it's his right side where he was speared after he died. And on the back image on the right part of the screen, you can see extensive wounds, scourging wounds on his back, and you can see the blood, lots of blood on his head from the thorns. You can even see the length of his hair that goes down to about between his shoulder blades. And there's something draped from his waist down to his knees. It looks like almost like a ponytail, but it's actually a piece of cloth. You can see some blood drippings on it in white. And you can see the blood holes on the bottom of his feet from the nail wound. All right, so the shroud contains three elements. The top left shows what the herringbone tweed of the linen fibers actually looked like. And then you can see the blood stains on the shroud. In the middle, you can see a faint image on the shroud. It's burned onto the top fibers. And on the right, you can see, we're going to see that there's physical evidence on the shroud of where it has been over the past centuries. So first we'll talk about the blood. It tells the story of Jesus' passion and death. Notice the face cloth on the right here. That's actually the actual face cloth that was on Jesus. It was recovered from the tomb, and it's been kept for its history in a chapel in Italy. And the blood on the face cloth matches the blood on the shroud. The blood is type AB positive, very rare type, and it's found on both, like I said, the face cloth and the shroud. And the blood contains male DNA, and it also contains a high content of bilirubin, which is produced by the blood when the body's under extreme trauma, as Jesus would have been crucified and beaten. The stains match the description of his brutal torture in the Gospels, in the Bible. And the stains were there before the image was formed on the cloth. So now we'll talk about the image on the shroud. It tells the story of Jesus' resurrection. So it's the image on the cloth. You can see down here on the bottom the burn marks, and then it's high resolution next to it. You can see just the very top fibers have been burned. It's a high resolution negative image, the front and back of about a 5'9", 175-pound man, burned onto the top 1% of the linen fibers, and it has three-dimensional properties. The physicists proposed that this image was the result of something called directional vacuum ultraviolet radiation from within the body at the moment of resurrection. And you can see the sort of radioactive properties on the right, where you can see Jesus' head. Actually, when you look at his face, and you think you see a white mustache under his nose, those are actually his front teeth, his top teeth. And you can also see on the bottom some bones in his hand. So it's as if the radiation was taking place from inside his body out onto the image, and thus you see his bones and teeth. So to create this image, it would require several billion watts of light to be released for 1/40 billionth of a second to form this image, and it would be comparable to 600,000 times brighter than this football field shown here at night, and 6 times more energy than Hiroshima. And this amount of energy we cannot produce today in science. So how do we know how much energy would be produced by this image? Well, some scientists started researching this back in 2011, and they were able to duplicate a small image on a piece of linen fiber with a sort of a dental X-ray machine. And this was actually, they were able to achieve a small amount of colors, but it enabled them ultimately to understand the actual amount of energy required to create this image. However, they still don't understand exactly how it was produced. Now, the physical evidence on the shroud is many, as it was over the years, over the centuries. They found pollen from Jerusalem on his head, on the shroud near his head. That would have been from the crown of thorns, probably. They found soil on his nose from Jerusalem, from falling on his face several times as he walked with the cross. And of course, they see the burn marks and the scorch marks, and they see water stains from putting out the fire. They see pollen from Turkey and Western Europe all over the shroud, and limestone from Jerusalem on his knees and feet, where he would have walked up the path and fallen several times. Oh, sorry, I didn't go forward. Excuse me. So you see all of these things were found on the shroud itself. So now the shroud followed an incredible 2,000-year path through history that can only be explained by the providence of God. The map here shows the path. It started down at the bottom in Jerusalem, as we know, and it stayed there after he died for about 17 years. And I imagine most probably it would have been kept by Mother Mary until her passing, which would have been around 65 years old. And then it was carried by one of Jesus' disciples, Thaddeus, to Edessa, Turkey. And it was there for 900 years. And then it was taken to Constantinople, Turkey, by the Byzantine Imperial Army when Edessa fell, and it remained there for 250 years. Then it was absconded by the Knights Templar, it is believed, from Constantinople, and it taken to Greece, where it kind of disappeared for 150 years. But it showed up finally in Liry, France, up at the top, and it was where it was first owned by a fourth-generation Knights Templar. And it was there for about 100 years, and then it was purchased by the Duke Louis of Savoy, and moved to Chambéry, France, and it was moved around a lot by his family for 120 years until it burned and finally ended up for safekeeping in Turin, Italy, where it's now resides, and it was gifted to the Catholic Church just recently. So here we quickly see, it was in Edessa. Showed the painting on the left of the king. Up, we need to advance. Okay, a famous painting on the left of King. The king there actually had leprosy, and he asked for the shroud to be brought to him. And after Jesus died, it was brought, and it said that when he touched it, he was cured, and he started Christianity in the region. And after his death, the cloth was hidden. You see in the middle, the walls of Edessa. It was hidden in the stone walls for almost 500 years because his ancestors didn't believe in Christianity, and they wanted it destroyed. And it wasn't discovered until a flood happened in 529 A.D., and they discovered the shroud in the wall. And at that point, it was brought out into the public, and it was called, and they put it in a frame. They framed the face, and they showed it in public. It was called the Edessa Dandelion, and images of the face started showing up in artwork. And you can see here the beautiful overlay of, here's the Dandelion on the left. You can see the overlay of the artist's paintings and the shroud, and it's an exact match. There's also some of the artists on the bottom you see painted a crown of thorns or some of the blood marks on his face. The painting in the middle is the most recent one by an Armenian artist. It's considered the most exact by experts in the scientific research field. So then it was taken to Constantinople, and the Byzantine emperors in Constantinople proudly displayed it to the people, and they showed it many times every week in front of a church, and they also minted coins with Jesus' face from the shroud on it, and on the back of the coin it says, Jesus Christ, King of Kings. And then as Constantinople fell, we believe the Knights Templar absconded with the cloth and put it into hiding to protect it from those who would like to destroy it. It was taken to Greece and then on, and like I said, it was finally owned by Geoffrey de Charnay, fourth generation Knights Templar. He lived in Liry, France, and you see his coat of arms for his family actually has the shroud on it with the front and back image of a man. And so it was given to him as part of his wedding dowry by his wife's family. So this ended up in Geoffrey's granddaughter's hands, and she inherited it. And she displayed it on the palace walls for guests to see. She used to sew velvet ruffles around it so it would look pretty. And she exhibited in many countries, and she finally traded it to the Duke of Savoy for 2 castles. And she was excommunicated from the church for that. But then, of course, the Duke of Savoy was actually part of the House of Savoy. It's a royal dynasty for centuries in southern Europe, in the mountains between Italy and France. And it was there, moved around all of Europe for about 125 years, so many people saw it. And then it was nearly destroyed in a fire. It was in a silver box, and drops of silver fell. You see how it was folded up on the bottom, and then drops of silver fell on the top of it. And when you unwind the cloth, you can see how the pattern of the scorch marks would occur. So at that point, shortly after, it was moved to Turin, Italy for safekeeping in a Catholic church there. And actually, the House of Savoy owned this shroud, even though it was in the Turin, and they only gave it to the church officially in 1983, when the last Duke died. Okay, so then here it is now. 440 years it's been there in Turin, Italy, in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, and you can see it inside at the front altar. You see the shroud being displayed. And it was kept here for the whole time except for 2 short instances during the World Wars. During World War II, it was moved to southern Italy to a convent and hidden under the altar to keep it from Hitler, who wanted to get his hands on it. So it was in 1933, which is actually 1900 years after Christ's death, that the Pope at the time decided it was time to display it in public. So they brought it out, and people could take pictures and do whatever they wanted to see. And then several years later, it was first color photograph was taken, and this color image contained some interesting information that hadn't been seen in the black and white images, and it prompted the question, was there 3D information somehow encoded in the shroud? So a scientist in 1975 discovered or invented something called the VP8 image analyzer for NASA, and it was used to look at the sky and see which stars were further away and closer away so they could map the universe. And they got the idea to put the picture of the shroud under this analyzer, and it came out with three-dimensional properties on it. If you were to take a picture of yourself and put it under that, it wouldn't show any three-dimensional properties. So this got the scientific research really started to take off at this point. And so the Pope allowed the shroud to be studied by multiple scientists around the world in 1978. You can see on the right all the types of researchers that studied it. They were given 3 days and 3 nights, and when they got done, they all agreed that whatever left this imprint on the shroud was something like radiation or extreme light energy. And they also agreed that this shroud is authentic. It contains the real image of a human form that was scourged and crucified, and it's not fake, and that there's real blood stains on it composed of real chemistry. So unfortunately, there were skeptics, and in '88, the skeptics took a small part from the top of the shroud, the top side, and they had it analyzed at 3 labs, and it came back to show that it was created in the medieval ages. And at that point, this is 12 years later, I guess, it was discovered that the sample was taken from an area that had been expertly rewoven, and that piece was from the Middle Ages. But the shroud itself, when they sampled that, it showed, and they sampled it 3 different ways in 3 different areas. It showed definitely the shroud came around 50 AD plus and minus 150 years. So this was not a replica. Unfortunately, the false claim of being fake was emphasized by the media, and there wasn't much mentioned about the true carbon dating in 2000. And because of this, a lot of people still believe it to be a medieval reproduction. And after the 3D information came out, this Dr. Soons decided he was going to take the image you see on the left from the shroud, and he created a 3D image in the computer, and then he made a hologram from this, a full-body hologram, which is the 3D body in light, if you can understand that. It's all scientific, but you see the front and the back over there of Jesus' body. And with this hologram, he was able to discover new features that were hidden in the hologram, that were hidden in the image that couldn't be seen with your eyes. What they found was that there were flowers, a wreath of flowers placed around his face and at his hands. And these flowers were specifically were the ones shown on the left. There was a chrysanthemum and this other flower that were grown during the time of his crucifixion. Now, they also saw there was a necklace under his beard that many Jewish men wore back in the time. And the necklace had 3 Hebrew letters on it that translate to small cattle, sheep, and goats. And that we know Jesus is called the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. They also found 2 coins on each eye, which was common to do to keep the eyes shut. And these coins were minted by Pontius Pilate in 29 AD in Judea. So then, with the 3D information, artists started to create 3D pictures and statues of Christ, and this is the first one that was created in 2009. Notice the rigor mortis position of the body, his head up like that. As he died, he was bent forward, and his knees were bent as he died like this. His arms were up in the air, of course, and were taken down later when he was placed in the tomb. So the rigor mortis is because his body was on the cross for more than 3 hours before it was taken down. Now we also see here a graphic artist, a digital artist, who took the Shroud's image on the left and computerized it to create a face, and then the computer gave it skin and hair and that sort of thing. And the picture on the right is where the artist modernized the picture, cleaned him up, and I actually, this is a poster you can buy online. I actually saw it locally at a Catholic high school chapel. Most recently, there's a real hyper-realistic body of the crucified Christ, and it took 15 years of research by Alvaro Blanca, and he led a group of artists to create this life-size model made out of latex and silicone. It even has hair and pores on the body. And it may tour the world in the next 20 years, so you may be able to get a look at it. And then most recently, someone created an AI image of the Shroud. They took the Shroud, they took the negative image of it, and they fed it through AI, and it came up with a picture on the right of the man's face. So now there's forensic medical research that's been performed over the last 6 years by all these types of researchers, and they wanted to show Christ's body as it would have looked after he was taken down from the cross. Now, I'll be presenting various forensic images of Jesus to show what really happened to him during the Passion and Crucifixion, and the images can be disturbing. However, they should be disturbing because they show the reality of Christ's suffering. So here we see the face on the left, the Shroud image, on the right, the forensic image. The face has puncture wounds from the crown of thorns on his head. He has a swollen eye and right cheekbone from being hit in the face with a stick-like object. His nose is crushed, maybe from the stick object, but also from falling face first while he was carrying the cross. And he also has parts of his beard pulled out. Next, we see the scourging. The whips that were used are shown on the upper left. They had 2 different types of tips. There were 120 lashes on his body, and the wounds on his chest in the middle here, you can actually see it comes from the Shroud, and it shows the exact size and shape of the tip of the whip. On the right, you can see a computer analysis of location of where all the wounds were on his body, front and back. And of course, the forensic image on the bottom of the result of the flogging. Now we see the crown of thorns. It wasn't really a crown, it was a helmet, as we see on the right. The thorns were 2-inch thorns, and there were about 30 puncture wounds. Some of them would have punctured his veins and arteries. And that's why you see that big drip on his front forehead and all the drips on the back of his head. Probably when they laid him on the cross to nail his hands in, the thorns would have pierced the back of his skull. Now we see the spikes or the nails while he was being crucified. The spike in the upper right shows where it was placed in his wrist, and as a result, it pierced his ulnar nerve, made his thumb retract, the thumbs retract. There was one in each wrist. You can see in the center the image of the wound on his left wrist. And there was only one spike through the feet, as you can see on the bottom left. It went through his left top of his foot and came out his right heel. And it would have looked like this in the artist's rendition. And in the Shroud picture, you can see the blood marks on the feet. Next, after Christ died, he was pierced in the side by a spear that would have looked like on the top left. And you can see the spear mark on his body in the middle. And the spear would have gone up through his heart sac, as you can see in that angle diagram, would have looked like this picture on the right. And the disciple John was watching as this happened, and he said in the Gospels that when the side was pierced, water and blood came out. The pierced heart sac would have contained clear fluid as a result of asphyxiation on the cross. And if that's not enough, there were more afflictions from carrying the cross. Notice on the bottom of the bottom picture how the blood from his sword wound is running across the back of his waist. That's important to note. We'll see why later. But he would have carried the cross, as you see in this example. The man is carrying and he falls, and it possibly he dislocated his right arm, they believe, that, from having fallen. And remember, in the fifth station of the cross, Simon helps Jesus carry the cross the first time he fell, and that may be why he dislocated his arm. He has abraised knees from falling and a severe blow to his head, neck, and shoulders from the cross smashing down on him when he fell, and they believe he was partially paralyzed on the right side. So now we're coming to some really amazing stuff that we're going to see that has just come out in the last few years, and you probably haven't even heard about this yet. It's done by some amazing scientists in Palermo, Italy, and we're going to show their image formation hypothesis, which actually makes scientific sense. There's been many in the past that don't make much sense. And we're going to see movement detected in the image, and nails were detected in his hands and feet, and other objects were discovered on his body. So that these scientists believe that the positioning of the shroud, that in order to affect the perfect high-resolution image seen on the shroud, it couldn't have wrapped the body during resurrection as shown on the top. This was because, for a couple of reasons, there was no side image on the cloth, and there was no wrinkles on the image. It was perfect picture. So they believe that the shroud wrapped the body, as you see in the bottom, very faintly. It wrapped around the top and bottom with the body elevated in the middle. So now we're going to see how the image was formed on the cloth. This is their hypothesis. So we know that there's a 3D body, and it was imaged by some light source onto the two-dimensional cloth, and the cloth would have been stretched tight. And if you imagine this blue plane, imaginary plane, at the center of gravity of his body, and imagine radiation coming out of his body up from his body, perfectly parallel to image the cloth on the top, and down from his body to image the cloth on the bottom. Now, the image on the cloth is directly proportional to the distance between the body and the shroud. So, for example, if you look at his knees on the top picture, you'll see the knees are closest to the shroud, and on the image on the right of the shroud, you can see his knees are very light because they're closest to the shroud. And in comparison, on the back of the shroud, on the back of the body, his knees are closest up or furthest away from the shroud. And there, when you look at the shroud image on the right, you see the back of his knees are actually the darkest part. So that maps to light and dark and grayscale in between, and that's how we see the three-dimensionality. Now, in order to do this, it would need a light projection called parallel projection, which has never been seen in science to date. The only types of projections we have, you see on the bottom, a laser projection light, which has a single point of light, and it goes through an object, and it'll put one point on the projecting image in the back, which would be the shroud. Or we see the light bulb, which would do a projective projection that is perspective light. But what we're seeing on the right down here is something called parallel projection, which is kind of like millions of laser light beams going directly through the body and showing directly what it sees on the back image of the shroud. That's a little intense, but so where did the light source come from? Well, it's believed that it came from, if the source of energy had come from inside the body, it might be too close to the cloth to create this image we see with no distortion. However, if the source of energy came from outside the body, the physicists theorized that if it was very far away and generated in a circular fashion like this, the light rays could have entered the body from two opposite directions, perfectly parallel to each other, to form the resulting high-resolution image on the shroud, and where we all believe what that source of energy was. So now we're going to talk about something totally amazing, which is movement on the shroud. Today we can capture something with cameras called stroboscopic photography. You've seen that a lot of times in pictures. And the boy on the right, for example, you see his hands in different positions as a burst of light captures them in a different image each time. Well, we're seeing that on the shroud. And quickly, the way the scientists do it is, for example, if you look at the top left, they take a tiny piece of the shroud image and they blow it up, and they use a computer to look for edges or lines, which would be objects in the image. It's hard to see the lines on the bottom right, but there are lines on there, and you see they're detailed next to it with yellow. Those lines are the same object in 4 different positions. All right, so let's see what's actually moving. Now, if we look at his left hand, up in the top right, you see that it's got the wound on it. This wound actually can be seen in 3 distinct places. On the right bottom, you see the image on the shroud itself, but it's enhanced with red lines, and those red lines are the edge of the wound moving. Sorry. All right, so there's the hand on the right in the image, and you can see detailed in red, the edges of the wound have moved. And you also see the fingers. So the fingers should be straight, but you see that they're bent. The fingers are bent. So what's going on here? It looks as though the hand is twisting and the fingers are starting to bend. Right? Now on the other hand, the right hand, and also notice that right hand up in the upper right is longer than the left hand, another indication he had dislocated his right shoulder. So his hand here at the upper right, upper left. So now we're seeing his right hand in 2 separate positions. At the top, we see him with his index fingers out, his thumb wrapped under, and his couple fingers starting to bend, and you can see that in the image to the right of it. Then underneath that, we see a totally separate image of the hand, where now the thumb is up and the fingers are totally bent, and there's like a Band-Aid around his thumb. And it's hard to see in the image to the right, but where I have highlighted with red boxes are the 2 placements of the thumb. The bottom box is the first image, and the top box is the second image with his hand wrapped around. So what's happening here is that there's not 2 hands here. It's the same hand, but in multiple positions. The hands are moving. And this just shows a quick reproduction of how that right hand would have been initially, and then it was twisting around some strings or leather straps, and it came to having that Band-Aid looking thing on his thumb. Now, we'll talk about what caused those straps in a few minutes. So let's talk about the motion on the hands. His hands should have looked like on the left, straight. What we're seeing in the image is sort of fuzziness around his fingers because they're in different positions. This discovery leads us to wonder whether this shroud might contain the partial video of the resurrection of Christ. They also see the nails in his hands, so they take a little upper left, they take a little piece image of his hand, and on the bottom they've drawn the nail they can see in there, and if you can see, the nail has several different angles to it, so it's moved in 3 different places. And the right other hand, there's actually a nail sticking out of his wound, the wound on his hand. You can see on the bottom, that light is actually a nail sticking out, because his hand would have been up against the cross through here, and the nail, when it came out of the cross, they left in his hand, and it's sticking out of the wound. And they also see the nail in his feet. It's initially sticking out of his feet, and as he's moving, his feet are straightening, and the nail goes up into his foot. So you see it outside and inside his foot in these various images. What we also see is a Teflon strap on his arm. This was typically done, and is still done by Jewish men, and this strap was at his arm and his head, and you can actually see on the lower left on his hand, the strap is moving down his hand, and also on his head, the strap and this box that contains verses from the Torah have moved down several places on his head and just above his eyebrows. So I'm going to skip some of these. So we also see a necklace that was on his head, attached to his hair somewhere. And you see there's a pendant at the bottom, and it's found in several locations as it's drawn. As there's sudden jolt of radiation, this pendant is moving, and also the chain on it is moving. Also, what they see is they found the image behind the Christ's head of the linen cloth that was wrapped up as a pillow. It's a face cloth. And at the top, that shiny object is actually a pin, a big pin, and it was attached to the folded face cloth, and then the necklace was hung from that. And we also know that Christ's body was not crucified naked. He was wearing a calisson. The way they know that is they can see it on the body, but they also can clearly see a belt on the body. And remember I said how that blood drained from his right side wound across his back. It should have just gone down his leg, but it went across the top. This is the back of his body. You see the red blood went across the top of the belt. And this belt, they believe, was a python belt that looked like this. And you see the python snake there, and now you can clearly see in the image there's a python pattern, and there's a belt buckle in there. And that belt buckle actually moved down his body as he was being crucified. And lastly, there's a strip of material that was taken off the shroud and tied around his waist when he was on the cross to help him get down. And that piece of material was left on his body because it contained blood and they wouldn't touch it. And that piece of material that was around his waist was then re-established on where it was torn off. And you can see the piece that was imaged on his body also reproduced on the side of the cloth that was sewn on. And what is in there is the belt buckle. You can see it's in multiple places. It's falling down his body. And so to wrap up here, we believe that Jesus left a lot of evidence of his passion and death and resurrection on the shroud. It was left in his tomb for his disciples to find for a reason, and it was kept safe for 2,000 years by those with faith who understood its value, until now when science and technology could begin to uncover its mysteries. And so this science is a bridge to advancing our faith by discovering the truth. The shroud itself can be seen in Turin every 5 years. It's brought out for viewing in Italy, but it can also be seen in the replicas of it that are authentic replicas can be seen all over the U.S. And there's one in the Funeral History Museum of Houston. And it has a life-size bronze statue and also has a great Shroud replica. I've actually been to one in Hanceville, Alabama, where Mother Angelica created this, and you can see them all over the country if you just research it. I have references on the slide, especially it contains a YouTube video of some of the more amazing discoveries they found. In the papers up front, I've given you references, and also after this, I'll go over to the hall, and if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer. I don't see anyone trying to get in and stop us, right? So should we take questions here or in the other hall? Okay, so I'll be located over there, and I'd be glad to answer any questions and talk. All right, so thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Except for not doing that.